So happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope you all had a good Memorial Day. I am Natasha Detweiler Davy, Director of Affordable Rental Housing here at OHCS. I think the pace of joining has slowed but not stopped, so I'll just have to make sure to check on that waiting room since I can't seem to turn it off. So thank you for joining today. Wanted to just spend a little bit of time going through what we are planning to focus on for affordable rental housing at the Housing Stability Council meeting this Friday. We also, I thought we could touch base with Tanisha from our government relations group on what's the hot topic and what's going on with the legislature today. I think it changes every day, so that'll be a fresh take. And then I was going to just do kind of a little update in terms of sharing some of the updates as we are presenting projects for Housing Stability Council approval, kind of an updated format for that we're looking to start incorporating. Thanks. Okay, so first up, Housing Stability Council. We have a seemingly lighter agenda from affordable rental housing. We have I think 4% private activity bond transactions that we will be bringing forward for approval. 3 of those projects have Article 11Q bond lift resources within them. So we are still trying to finalize to get updated documents with an agreement in place with lenders to make sure that those projects can actually move forward. But so we are bringing those in a little bit of a proactive stance in the hope that we will be actually able to wrap all of that up this month, to be able to close more transactions. And so I think while I'm on that subject, I will just do a brief update on Article 11Q bond lift documents and resources. As many of you are likely aware, we have done a few different convenings with lenders, a couple with developers, trying to understand and really paint out the picture of dynamics of both what the state is requiring or what the state needs to achieve through the use of Article 11Q bonds and maintaining its ownership and operational controls, and then unpacking that and in tandem with what lenders need for investing in properties as well. And so I think we've done gotten some really good clarity points with that. At this point in time, I am trying to hold off a little bit longer in distributing broadly the current documents because counsel from DOJ, ORIC, and transactions in our pipeline are actively meeting both last week and this week, discussing, debating documents. And so we are hoping to have some of that additional follow-up to see, hopefully, that we've been able to reach to mutually agreeable terms on that. So we'll know more before the end of this week how that's looking. And I think really importantly and critically, we are OHCS and the Department of Justice are really positioned and understanding and wanting to be responsive to balancing those needs, and really need to drive this at the transactional space so that we have lenders participating to try to get over that finish line. And so the more engagement and feedback from lenders on those deals, the better we'll be able to fast track the implementation into documents and then moving to closing on those. So again, hopefully by the end of this week, we'll have another update I think I am wanting as much as possible to commit to sharing updated templates as soon as we really have them, as we're still really navigating a couple of the remaining points here. Again, hoping that we get feedback on some revised proposals this week that the council has been working on together. Let's see. And so that's for Housing Stability Council, those 5 4% deals, 3 of those have Article 11Q bonds in them. We also, Michael Parkhurst will be bringing back the preservation framework that he shared with Housing Stability Council last month. We were really at time, the meeting had gone a bit long already at that point, so we cut short the conversation for getting feedback on that preservation framework from Housing Stability Council. So we're bringing it back with the intent of really focusing the time in the meeting on active dialogue and feedback with Housing Stability Council about that framework. See other things coming up. The permit supportive housing and LIFT NOFAs have been received. They're on track for getting recommendations to Housing Stability Council by the August meeting. We are looking to looks like, I think, aiming for the first half of June for putting out our next NOFA that is focused on small projects, and then also veteran housing development, hopefully for the first half of June. I think staff are just finalizing that document, and so please be on the lookout for a technical advisory about that. We'll have an information session to learn more about that as well. We are also aiming with our private activity bonds to open the next window for taking applications, hoping that documentation for that is currently under review at the Department of Justice, but we'll release that as soon as we can. So we're hoping again in the coming weeks that we'll be able to release that offering. And then I think maybe Tanisha, now if you're here still, yes, I'll segue over to you for the legislative update.
Perfect. Hi, y'all. This is Tanisha Rosas. I'm with the government relations part of our agency, and I focus on affordable rental housing. I have some news, but also I'm sure many of y'all know there is a walkout currently happening. So take everything I say with a giant grain of salt, and that the only ones who know what will happen are those who have walked away and decided whether or not they're going to come back. But the good news is budgets are a priority this year, and there's a lot of conversation about ours coming up shortly with some good news in there. And then also because of the continuing resolution that if session ends and there's no budget, funds are continued. But there is a very important agency that was created to start on July 1, and it's the fire marshal, part of the fire marshal's office. Considering fire is a huge thing that we need to monitor, and the state has made a lot of effort towards, there is becoming a major priority in getting that budget passed. And so whether it be through session or through a special session, it should be a fairly quick and urgent process, because you want to be able to stand up your agencies that focus on fire during fire season. So that's an element of good news for us, in that because of the urgency of that agency, it will encourage the passing of all state budgets. But overall, things are looking really good. The governor's recommended budget was fairly hefty and quite ambitious. And I know the legislators are all very passionate about housing, and that I don't know if they match her energy, but they definitely are meeting the call of making housing a priority. And so that we're expecting good news from that budget. A lot of bills are moving through, both related directly through OHCS and very good news for us, Senate Bill 225, which is the private activity bond, which removes a blackout period and then also allows us to work more effectively with our housing authorities. It passed and it's on its way to the governor's office. So did our agency cleanup bill. So those both have passed and on their way to the governor's desk. So as soon as they're signed, they'll be law. So that helps us a ton. And so other than that, because of the walkout, we don't have anything concrete, but there's a lot of good news and a lot of hope, and housing remains a priority for members all across the aisle. So we have assurances that things will happen, just whether or not we can predict them is looking very unlikely. So as soon as we know more, we'll make sure that we share our updates, and hopefully they're going to be all good news by our next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanisha. Talk about interesting times. And so part of what we will learn as we go through the coming weeks, I think we're down to just weeks, right? For this legislative session will be, better, obviously, understanding about what resources OHCS and affordable rental housing are going to get from state investments. We have, just for general awareness, we do have ongoing resources in our low-income housing tax credit program, document recording fee, and general housing account program, public purpose charge money reflected through our housing development grant program, HDGP. But the bulk of our resources that we are likely to have will be legislatively allocated, and those would include resources dedicated to preservation, resources for our LIFT program, for our PSH program, both development capital as well as rent assistance and services funding for those that supporting that PSH initiative. And so as we look forward, and I think in light of Executive Order 2023-04, which is that production executive order, we've been talking through, what are the kind of critical updates that we need to be looking to and mindful of to really support broad expansion, both of the potential for expanded resources as well as to improve our ability to move projects through our pipeline and into construction. And I think that raises a couple key points. And I think I've referenced this in other conversations and probably earlier partner call meetings. But one of the things that we are all of you at OHCS is aware of is that costs have been really in an unreliable state for quite some time, and we are continuing to struggle with cost escalation and gaps in funding budgets by the time we reach the closing table. And that is obviously a challenging situation, in particular when we don't have additional resources to commit to projects to bring them over that finish line. And I think part of what we've really identified is that part of the challenge is that when we have funded a project a year or two before it's ready for the closing table, the ability for those gaps to come through is really exacerbated. And so part of what we're kind of looking to do, in addition, I guess, and then at the same time, we also have a large number of resource offerings. I've just talked about a preservation NOFA that has wrapped up. We have our PSH NOFA and our LIFT NOFA that is being scored right now. We have an upcoming small project NOFA and Veterans Gap NOFA that have been combined into one to ease administrative and hopefully operational use of that for partners. But really wanting to relook at our resource offerings and figure out how we can centralize those to not be, to provide better navigation, both a little bit of so that we are out of a process of continually opening a new offering, but also for development partners to have a little less burden in terms of navigating resources. And so I think we will be getting legislative investment for resources, hopefully this month. And so as we will, take whatever legislative resources, the ongoing resources that we have, and that's the time essentially starting in July when we'll be looking to begin doing the work of figuring out what is the framework for getting these resources out. What is the timeline for these? What does our funding calendar, how should that look for the calendars years 2024 and 2025? And so, I think both wanting to flag that there will be opportunity for input and engagement with OHCS and affordable rental housing staff and leaders as we go through that process of figuring out what that should look like. And I want to signal a couple things. One is, again, really wanting to figure out ways where we can centralize resource offerings instead of having 50 flavors of NOFAs, having an application that has able to access all of the different resources and potentially maybe add more flexibility in what can be layered with each other. That's often a challenge. And then I think another piece of that is trying to understand how we can provide more surety and more understanding about what resources will really be needed when you reach that closing table. And that piece, I think, will be likely accomplished both through standing up and, again, pre-development investments, both in partnership with existing CDFIs and others that fund pre-development, as well as having some state resources to align with that use. And then third, I think we are keenly understanding and aware that we need to have a more active engagement with our pipeline so that we can be providing better support and feedback, more consistent support and feedback to you as you are working on your pipeline of projects to be able to get that really detailed, even pro forma level of feedback. And so looking at both, standing up an ability to do some pre-development investments, as well as having a technical advisor role to be able to engage on that project, on those project details with you all. And so I think those are some kind of the big pieces of this work that we will expect to be engaging on. And, I think we have more to do to really pin down what our engagement strategies will be. I do think we would be standing up engagement groups to focus on, create a pre-development work group, a funding opportunity work group. And then for those of you from other funding jurisdictions to want to be able to have deliberate conversations and outreach with other affordable housing funders to be able to understand how we might be better able to work in alignment with each other. And I see some questions coming in the chat. So I think on okay, so Ellen, I see your question around the land acquisition program and ability to do mapping to layer those over. And so I will, I think that we will have, I'm trying to think, I think we can have somebody reach out to you. I think we do have some of those that mapped and certainly do have the ability to do mapping, but to be able to provide access to that. So I will ask somebody to reach out to you. Let's see, Brian Hoop, I see your question on the QAP. I think it is very likely as we go through the process of looking to, kind of re-centralize offerings that the QAP will need to be updated to reflect that. I don't, Angela, are you on the call? Would you like to say anything about that, the QAP updates?
Sure. Yeah, I think, we're just trying to move through preparations for the 9%, which I see as the next question. We're aiming for August open on that and through this next 4%. And then I think we can turn our attention to a QAP in alignment with whatever shifts we make in an effort to move towards consolidated NOFAs. So I think all of that will get coordinated, and I would assume that we would do another update in 24.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Craig, your question is how current programs are being effective to the growing need. Do you want to, is there any other insight you want to raise about your question? I think we're certainly evaluating program effectiveness. Obviously, costs are also increasing as we're trying to balance strategies, of course.
Sure, I can clarify maybe. Basically, what I'm trying to suggest is that the need is increasing so dramatically now, and getting a rental voucher or a housing voucher or whatever is addressing so few of the people in need, and it's oftentimes giving them a $250,000 a unit apartment building, whereas so many other people are getting nothing. And how do we create housing opportunity that really starts to reverse the trends of late and provides something to everybody who has need?
Yeah, which really is more of a less of a development response and more of a rent assistance system response. Is that in terms of providing everyone their part of the response, public response?
Well, I would say I think that we need to really look at what are the roots of the problem, and how is it changing so dramatically, so quickly right now, and what can we do to change that dynamic? Because I think that the way things are going, we will never achieve full success. And so my points are that we need to measure our success against the trends, not against the few people that get benefit, and that we need to figure out how to address increasing rents. And one way is to really provide alternative housing that's adequate, that's truly affordable. Because if we can decrease the demand, then we can decrease the profits as well. So how do we achieve a better overall strategy at addressing these overwhelming trends of poverty and need?
Absolutely, Craig. I appreciate the focus on trying to understand the root cause. I do think this is something that we continue to engage in and prioritize. I do think a lot of the work of our housing stabilization effort division is really more aligned into that direction. But certainly, as we do engagement, I think finding opportunities that could maybe better focus our work on that as well is going to be certainly possible. Okay, then looking at the rest of the conversations. So I think what I'm seeing in the comments around the geography and the QAP is really wanting to have some of that data, the data really connected and be able to be showed in maps or in a way that you can understand how different areas might score from a QAP perspective. So I will loop back with our policy and data team and see and research team and see what there might be along those lines. So I think both to Ellen and Travis, I think as we have information or resources that might do that, we will share those out. Let's see, I think we already talked about the 9% and the QAP. Robin, I see your question on 4% and the lifts for Portland. We haven't done that funding calendar development at this point yet, but I would expect that we would have an offering that would allow both lift and 4% in 2024 for all areas of the state. I think the reason why this previous NOFA had not done that is because we had allocated those resources that use lift and 4% through Metro. So that is not a ongoing alignment, but that was something that was done to support that need. So I think be sure to participate as we do funding calendar development, but I would expect that would be possible. Okay, Brian, there's some more information from OMEP on geography scoring. It's interesting. And then were there any other questions not in chat? Shelley, I thought I saw your hand at some point.
Yeah, I found the answer.
Okay.
Myself, so thanks.
Great. Awesome. Okay, and then one other, I wanted to, as we've been bringing projects to Housing Stability Council for approval, we've been, doing, we have the different write-ups with different descriptions of services and outreach, and we've also been kind of categorizing into kind of groups about where is a project working towards meeting equity and racial justice? Is it meeting it, or is it actively furthering it? And in the evolution of our conversations with Housing Stability Council around equity and racial justice, that has felt like we've reached a time to do another step of evolution in terms of the way that we talk about that to Housing Stability Council, in particular, feeling like the place where we are kind of giving a conclusion to Housing Stability Council has been challenging and kind of not understanding what all of those dynamics are. And so I wanted to just, I'll screen share. Some of you that have projects going to Housing Stability Council this month probably have seen this, but this is a new template that we're hoping to, that we will be kind of piloting this month with Housing Stability Council. And I think I'm sharing the right thing. Okay. And the idea here is that we are, instead of kind of rounding up to conclusions or making any kind of references, that we're really trying to spend our time there with, really, or just creating a table where we're sharing some facts about the project, which I think has the added, added bonus of being able to specifically call out all of the threshold agreements that we have tied to the funding resource or funding offering, and then able to also separate what is about the development team and the ownership versus the project operations itself. That seems like sometimes that the distinction between organization or developer and the project entity and what is in place and implemented the project has varied. And so we've come up with right now, it's an Excel form with the idea that you're providing, and I think work with your production analyst at this point in time to provide responses on this, but being able to provide essentially a profile of what the developer, ownership, property management, service provider, marketing, and MWSB structure is at the project, with the idea, I guess I should need to actually select these. So if I select these and fill all of these out, what it would get us is, I should have done this before, essentially a table that looks like this, that has, you know, the project name, developer, the list of applicable threshold requirements, and then really just a profile of the project. So essentially trying to give Housing Stability Council in a consistent format some of the apples to apples pieces across projects. We still do the narrative and still have all of the information there about the financing and otherwise for Housing Stability Council, but trying to kind of update that look on equity and racial justice as it applies to the project. Shelley.
Could you go back to your form? I wanted to see what you have for the Meeby Weeby. You went past that really fast. Okay. So one of my concerns is because, you know, we've been sort of called to the carpet during one Housing Stability Council meeting, which we responded to in our application and got full points, yet the person presenting wasn't able to describe. And so I'm just wondering if you can, because you say commitment on prior OHC funded projects. Okay, so that's all you're going to have is has met or exceeded. Okay, because fortunately we've been lucky enough to exceed most of ours, even being in very rural, but that's not communicated, and then they sort of make comments about, you know, the application and stuff. So
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that,
so we can do it.
that
Yeah,
should
I think,
help.
yeah, it should. And I think yeah, it's hard, especially for whomever is presenting, to track all of those facts as we go. So I think like the more we can contain in the write-up, the better. And I think maybe probably getting to a place of practice where we're having development teams review those 1 or 2 pagers probably would be helpful. But yeah, appreciate that feedback. Any other?
Natasha, can I just follow up on like the communities of color and getting service organizations? We're starting to find that, you know, we are trying to provide some money and stipends early on in projects, but we're finding people don't have the capacity to take on our projects. So I've sort of asked our team to start developing a diary of the date we contacted somebody, who we talked to, and their response. So at some point, I think you need to be able to, for us to provide you that information. As we did the research, we did try to do it, but they just don't have the capacity. And unless we put $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in our uses to help pay for some of that, and as you know, with RD projects, we cannot use, you know, that you can't put that in your budget. So It's like we try to get a small stipend up front through the uses of the budget. But I'm sure Oregon Housing doesn't want us to see $50,000 to $100,000 up front to a service provider. And again, that's, you know, to get them to want to work with us, but it may not be an ongoing, you know, we don't have the capacity ongoing on some of these ACC rehabs. And so I guess I just, you know, hoping too that, you know, we're not getting dinged because we don't show it, because that organization is getting hit by maybe several entities or developers in that area, and they don't have the capacity to work with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I also think, how and yet if there is this ability for project, anyway, if there were capacity for those service organizations or others to be engaged and actually funded through projects regardless. So I think it is definitely a balanced conversation. And I think this piece of it, you know, the summary or the profile, I think we're calling it, is really with the idea of just sharing some base information. We'll solve all of the narrative components. And I think, you know, functionally, that our NOFA process or our funding process needs to have more of that broader understanding about, like you're saying, you know, how many organizations did we reach out to? I also wonder from a capacity side if we can build our understanding about where we are seeing service partners with capacity versus not, and what kind of, you know, offerings of capacity resources might also be incredibly valuable. So I appreciate that. So let's see, Robin, we don't yet have this linked on our website, but I can certainly share it with you. And then I guess I think we've just been emailing it to development teams, but I think you're right that having it handy will end up making sense. So we'll find a place to post that. Okay, yeah, so we can email it out to this distribution list. And I think, so Travis, I'm sorry, I'm silent reading your comment. I think it is, yeah, so really really needing to understand from the, from culturally specific organizations, developers and service providers, it seems like understanding where they are being tapped quite a bit to be able to get on applications and create MOUs, but not really having resources to respond to it. So I think that's something that we'll need to look toward doing.
Yeah, and maybe just to build on that, I would say, if OHCS is looking at capacity building dollars or support, I think we'd all rather see that capacity building happen in the area where these organizations are supporting their communities, not in terms of responding to RFPs. And I know there's obviously you want to know where those connections are being made and how that support is being provided in communities. Yeah. And obviously we all want to see it that go to the benefit of the folks who need the support, but just understanding that there is a disconnect there, and sometimes the most valuable connections happen after the clarity of funded projects comes to be.
Absolutely, yeah. Appreciate that. Any other feedback, thoughts around this or any of the other topics?
Hey, Natasha, Travis again. Yeah. I'm wondering where OHCS is in the conversations with or MEP funds.
We are, so in conversation certainly, but it's that is run through the energy, I think it's energy or weatherization services, which is not in our division. So I think we can, and I don't think I see them on this call. But is there some feedback we can relay, or I can create a contact to launch that conversation?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear who the best contact is. I certainly have some there that I can give some feedback to, and also share it with you. Also, you're in the loop. I can get that over to. I think they're looking for feedback by tomorrow, so I can get that to you in writing shortly. But I think, in short, I think there's some benefit for OHCS to be involved in that. What I'm seeing with the new application and funding process that they're preparing to roll out is pretty problematic in terms of the timing of being able to design in energy efficient measures, get the commitment that you're going to have funds to pay for them, and then be able to implement them in the time frame that their new rollout proposes. So I understand what I believe is the problem that they're solving for, of having a bunch of funds tied up on projects that are slow to move forward when those funds could be going to good use. But I think that their solution creates all new and different problems that I think are particularly problematic for the less well-resourced organizations, such as BIPOC-led organizations, nonprofits, and to a certain degree, the housing authorities that those funds are intended to prioritize. So can get you more notes, but the timing, and I get the problem they're trying to solve, but the timing in particular is kind of at odds with, I think, what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay. That makes sense and really helpful. And yeah, if you have notes or thoughts to shoot my way, please do. And I have to admit, I've not been tracking the details of that update, so I will also take a look. Thank you. I see your ditto there, Brian, as well. Thanks. Any other comments, thoughts? Okay, well, I guess with that, we have some follow-up thinking to do about mapping. We'll be reaching out to the energy team and the OMEP program. And otherwise, we'll see you on Friday at Housing Stability Council. Thank you all.